I talk a lot in this channel about the state of the modern day Hollywood machine and how the 2010s explosion of franchise filmmaking has brought us to a point now where seemingly everything in the entertainment industry is being wrung dry and squeezed for all it's got, which to be fair is the case in almost any era of entertainment. Us humans really don't have the capacity to not oversaturate the market with whatever is hot at the moment. It's just kind of the natural flow of things. It's safe, it's easy, and most importantly, it makes money. Big hit happens, copycats try their own versions, and the trend is eventually run into the ground and is never able to reach the same heights it once did. However, what's unique about this era in the entertainment industry is that unlike say 20 years ago where there was only so many spots in the calendar for these big franchises to exist at any given time, now that number is essentially infinite. You don't necessarily need to snag the best summer release window for your big tentpole movie. Now these IPs and franchises can exist completely absent of that model. Companies like Netflix can support any number of their own franchises within their own completely self-contained ecosystem, dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into these projects and simply releasing them on their own service. And it works. And this is happening everywhere across every streamer, every network, and every studio. So as a result, these franchises are being run through at a rate not thought possible 10, 15, 20 years ago, and because of that speed and the nakedly cynical way it's all happening, the magic of these once beloved properties is mostly just gone. Now, that's not to say that none of these franchises can still produce great stuff here and there. I mean, this video is about one of those rare exceptions, but at least for me, the way I view IPs like Star Wars or Marvel or any of these things, you name them, is, to put it simply, passionless.
I don't care.
I am so far past the point of having any emotional investment in any of these things. You tell me Marvel Studios shuts down their production tomorrow, and my reaction is going to be some version of, okay, had a nice run, I guess. Now, I still consume a lot of this stuff and enjoy a great deal of it. I'm not going to pretend to be above that in any way. And you know, it's good for the content, baby. Love that. But the way I used to get actively hyped and look forward to the futures of all these franchises is very much a thing of the past. And for me at least, I don't think any franchise embodies that feeling more than Star Wars. Now, I have been a fan of Star Wars for as long as I can recall being able to be a fan of anything. It's always been a part of my life. I watched some combination of the movies nearly every weekend as a kid. I played all the video games. I read a bunch of the mostly shitty books. I had all the toys and collectibles and Star Wars themed birthday parties, and I still buy at least one Star Wars Lego set a year just for the nostalgia of it all. Point being, I have spent a majority of my life as a fan of this franchise. For better or for worse, I have always been invested on some level. In recent years though, that fandom has really been tested and at this point is mostly broken. I mean, we know all the reasons: the oversaturation, the laziness, the reliance on cheap nostalgia and hallway scenes, weird CGI corpse resurrections, the lack of direction, the inability to create anything original, the shocking lack of planning in the sequel trilogy, the taking of their one good original thing and turning it into a cheap nostalgia bait waste of time. I mean, it's everything. It's also just how negative and toxic a large portion of the Star Wars community is. I mean, this is a demo here that literally cannot be pleased under any circumstance and will bitch and moan about the smallest of issues unless they get the exact thing that tickles their stunted 12-year-old brains, okay? The whole thing is just a nightmare. It makes enjoying the franchise a real chore, which again has led me to losing most, if not all, of my interest in it over the recent years. I mean, going back to my Marvel example, if you were to tell me that Star Wars was shut down tomorrow, I wouldn't just say, oh well, like I would with the MCU. I would probably say something like, thank God. It's all just too much at this point. Disney, the community, the weird deification of George Lucas as if he didn't contribute to this mess. It's all fucked. Even poor Dave Filoni is hailed as the savior of the franchise one day and in the dumpster with his cowboy hat the next. You just can't win. And that supposed upcoming slate of projects, dear God, that looks disgusting. Granted, most of this won't ever come out, but the fact that some of this stuff is even on this graphic is telling about how just truly creative relatively bankrupt this franchise is at this point. Like, a droid story? What the fuck is that? The R5-D4 backstory we've all been dying to see? Let me guess, did he also know Anakin Skywalker and the reason his head blew up was because he recognized Luke as his son? I don't know. Sounds pretty good to me. Maybe him and the Gonk can go on a little adventure. Why not? I mean, the way I'm talking about all this makes it seem like I hate Star Wars and always have, but it's just what this series has devolved into. There's just nothing left. I literally don't have the capacity to care about any of this anymore. When I see Star Wars now, all I see is slop and emptiness and people having their eyes pop out of their heads whenever something they recognize appears on screen. It's a franchise long past the point where anything truly inspired and good can come out that is destined to die a slow, sad death march to being irrelevant. And while my thoughts on the future of Star Wars remain the same, I was wrong on one front. Because out of nowhere came a show that's not just good in a sea of terrible Star Wars media, but so good it genuinely might be the single best thing this franchise has ever put out in any medium in its nearly 50-year existence. And by everything, I do mean everything. I say this with not a shred of hyperbole. Andor is maybe the single most shockingly good piece of television I've ever seen in my life. It's not the very best thing I've ever seen, but it's a piece of media that excels and greatly overperforms despite the broken, brain-dead franchise that it exists in. I mean, it has absolutely no right being as good as it is, more than anything that has ever had no right being as good as it is. I mean, I watch the show, in virtually every episode, I'm beside myself with how enthralled I am by everything in it, and how well written it is, and how deep it is, and how confident it is, and how it takes the Star Wars universe to a place I didn't think it could ever go, a place where mature emotional storytelling can take place that does not lean on one single ounce of nostalgia or cheap cameos or lightsabers or embarrassing CGI de-aging. Like, no one pulls out a fucking lightsaber this entire show, and it's totally entertaining. I just think to myself while watching it, how does this exist? This is Disney Star Wars here, a place where creativity goes to die and is kept alive by one or two hype moments every other year. This is an IP that has been on hallway scene life support for the past like 6 years, and yet it still exists. As far as I know, I am not in a coma. Granted, I guess I can't know for sure, but even if I am, I still gotta make this video because even if all you guys are just figments of my imagination, you still need to understand just how good this show is and how it resurrected my Star Wars fandom for one last amazing ride. So buckle up because this is gonna be a long one. Now, if you were to go back a few years ago and tell me that the Cassian Andor spin-off show would end up being my single favorite piece of Star Wars media ever, I would have laughed right in your face because I wasn't then, and even now, I'm still not really a big fan of Rogue One. I mean, I don't hate it or anything, I think it's fine, but I just can't get over a few of my major gripes with it. I think the characters are all underbaked, it's extremely rushed, there's some obvious reshoots in there. It features some of the most shameless cameos in the entire Disney Star Wars era, which is saying a lot. It's just a very safe, kind of bland movie. It's not quite as played safe as something like The Force Awakens, but it still has that same core to it that holds it back from being truly special.
Hey, you just got yourself.
No. Sorry. We don't want any trouble. Sorry.
I like some of the stuff in there, and I think the follow-through on the ending is commendable, but it's just not something that made me hyped for the prospect of a Cassian Andor spin-off show when it was first announced. In fact, when I first heard about this show, it was actually a thing that I made fun of a lot, because to me the idea of doing a prequel to someone who was pretty much just some random guy in Rogue One was totally ridiculous. To me, it was almost like doing a spin-off show for like Captain Panaka Chewbacca from The Phantom Menace. Like, why this guy of all people? The only unique thing about him in that movie was that he was a bit of an asshole that was willing to kill people for the cause, which was a nice trait for a couple scenes here and there, but that's pretty much all the character had going for him in that movie. Aside from that, he was pretty much just a standard run-of-the-mill gruff good guy. Plus, if anyone deserved more screen time from that movie, it was Krennic, not Cassian. His adventures as like a middle manager in the Empire trying to get some respect on his name was what really stood out in that movie. That stuff does rock pretty hard, and I will always stand by. Love me some Ben Mendelsohn.
We stand here amidst my achievement, not yours!
All that being said though, despite my overall lukewarm feelings on Rogue One as a whole, the one nugget from that movie that I really do like and I think paved the way for Andor was telling a Star Wars story about ordinary people, regular, flawed, non-space wizard, normal ass people. People who make mistakes and aren't all good or all evil and don't hold incredible power but represent the backbone of the Empire and the Rebel Alliance. You get a clear window into what life is like for regular people in this time period in the Star Wars saga, which you really don't get anywhere else. Star Wars is not exactly a franchise that's known for being grounded, and that's a totally fine thing, by the way, for a series mainly focused on magical space wizards, but it does leave this perfect vacuum for more grounded stories like this that Rogue One stepped in and filled really well. Sometimes less is more, and by simply not having a Jedi, Sith, cosmic battle of fate and destiny story can breathe life into a franchise that is no stranger to running back the same plots over and over and over again. For that fact alone, it will always stand out in some way among the other Star Wars movies, so I get why a few of the more hipster fans out there say it's the best one. I think they're wrong, of course. I'd say it's like the 5th or 6th best Star Wars film personally, but you know, I get it. It's something different in a franchise that's otherwise very much the same.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Again, it could have been a more focused, better paced movie in hindsight, but for what it is, it works and serves as a great blueprint for Andor, which now that we live in a post-Andor world, I can't help but be at least somewhat more sympathetic to it. Regardless of my feelings towards this movie in a vacuum, the bottom line is it led to Tony Gilroy bringing his talents to this franchise, so I'd say it all worked out in the end. Now, how this movie works as essentially the now finale to Andor the show, well, we'll come back to that later, but for now at least, I think it is fair to say that it certainly works as a precursor to the show, if nothing else. Despite the movie taking place after literally all the events of the show, it sets the stage nicely for what to expect from it and gives more weight to everything Cassian does, knowing where his story ends. And even though that ending has a whole lot of punch to it, it's nothing compared to how he got there. Now, before we get too much into the weeds here, one of the great things about this show that I have to mention right from the jump is the way this show is structured. For all the many complaints I have about the current state of the entertainment industry and streaming, and just everything that comes with the modern day Hollywood machine, I think it is pretty much undeniable that we are living in a golden age of television. Not film, by any means, but television, pretty fucking good right now. There are more great shows going now than there ever has been, and more options to watch them without being held back by cable like we all used to be not all that long ago. That is all true. However, one of the few downsides of all this is that for whatever reason that is still lost on me, the vast majority of shows these days rarely have seasons longer than like 8 episodes max, sometimes even less. I mean, some modern TV seasons really ride that line of being essentially long movies or like miniseries more than actual legit full seasons of TV, especially when you have to wait like a minimum of 2 years in between seasons of most shows now. Andor, on the other hand, has a whopping 12 episodes in both seasons, and absolutely none of it is filler. You feel like you're actually getting a full season of TV and not some overly drawn out wannabe movie turned into a mediocre streaming series. And even beyond that, the way this show structures itself is perfect for the modern day streaming model. Instead of doing the typical extreme of either dumping the whole season all at once or releasing one singular episode every week, Andor puts out basically a movie-length full-length mini arc every week over the course of a month of release time. You get these wonderfully crafted 3-episode arcs that are perfectly digestible to watch over the course of a week, or as, again, essentially a small-scale mini Star Wars movie. Every week you get a brand new setup and payoff that leaves you fully satisfied and not overwhelmed to catch up, while also building the greater overarching story at the same time, and providing enough content to remain relevant in the current pop culture discourse. It's just such a clever way of structuring your show for a streaming service. The whole thing was clearly made with its release medium in mind, and that is not something you can say about most, if not all, stuff these days. Like, you watch a trailer for something like Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, and you just think to yourself, why is this not getting released in theaters? Because it's so clearly meant for that medium. But Andor is just the opposite. It is streaming non-derogatory, which made watching it such a breeze and something I would eagerly be looking forward to every week, unlike, say, I don't know, The Last of Us Season 2, where even though it's a watchable enough show overall, its single episode release structure meant that like half of the episodes don't really feel all that satisfying to watch individually, especially in a season with only 7 fucking episodes. You get a big action-packed, narratively intense installment one week and a massive come down the next that just feels like the show is killing time and kicking rocks till its next big set piece moment. So I gotta give it to Andor for not just having these great mini arcs within the show, but releasing it in a way that is perfect for the medium it exists in. If you're watching this video in the future and haven't seen the show, I highly recommend consuming the show in these 3-episode chunks and just taking breaks in between. Trust me, as someone who has watched it both in these small chunks and binged it all the way through, it is much better enjoyed in the way the show was released. Now, if there was ever a way to start your Star Wars show off that immediately tells the audience that this ain't your typical Star Wars story, it would be by kicking things off in a literal brothel. Granted, it's not nearly as edgy as I make it sound. It isn't like the opening scene of Andor here, but it is very emblematic of how on its own terms everything in this show is. Yes, it exists in the Star Wars universe and has the look and feel of the franchise, but nothing is compromised on the altar of the typical Disney Star Wars bullshit. If the writers want to start the show off in a space brothel, that is where it will start, and if they want to include a legacy character or not, that is what will happen. Its vision is totally and completely uncompromised, and that freedom is what allows it to reach the heights it does. This intro also establishes another core theme of the show, and that is consequences. This is a point that I will be constantly going back to throughout this video. Every single story beat, every arc, every death, absolutely everything that happens in this show, big and small, revolves around the consequences of the actions of the characters. The show is written in a way where character choices matter a great deal. Case in point, the entire narrative of this series is kicked off by Cassian murdering 2 random low-level nameless cops.
We're going together. I'll tell them what happened.
After leaving the brothel where he tried to get some intel on his long-lost sister, 2 company officers tail him and try and shake him down, only to get killed by Cassian in a fit of desperation. Now, in any other piece of Star Wars media, this event would mean nothing. It would mean less than nothing. In fact, in Rogue One, where Cassian did a very similar thing to this, it meant nothing. Death in Star Wars has always been cheap and rarely explored in any kind of serious way. This is a franchise here where characters routinely talk about how death only makes them stronger, but here, the entire first arc of the show is Cassian messing up by killing these 2 guys and dealing with the blowback for like the first 3 episodes, and pretty much the whole season really. It doesn't matter that they're nobodies and don't matter in the grand scheme of the plot, because this whole show is about nobodies and every life has weight and meaning. It also establishes exactly who Cassian is, a guy with good but overall selfish intentions that if pushed to his limits is not above getting his hands dirty to keep going. At this point in his life, he is entirely out for himself. In short, the guy's an asshole, and the whole rest of this first arc is the show showing us why he is the way he is and how he lives his life. We learn about his home planet of Kenari and how he was rescued by Aunt Petunia and how his whole tribe, including his sister, is likely dead. We see how he lives his life on Ferrix and how the locals see him as a troublemaker and someone you take a deep breath when you see coming towards you. He owes money to everyone in town, he's burned bridges, he's taken advantage of people, and yet there is this sort of unspoken bond between everyone on Ferrix where no matter how much people like Cassian push them, they will always look out for one another above everything else. We'll get more into the culture of Ferrix in a few arcs down the line, but the way the show depicts the bonds of people under the thumb of the Empire is one of the things that really elevates it to that special level. At the end of the day, everyone is united in their oppression. Simultaneously during this arc, we also see the flip side of Cassian's life from the perspective of Cyril Karn, a man similar to Cassian in that he comes from simple means, but different in that he has given himself over to the Empire entirely. He is a true blue believer in the regime, which is really interesting since he's just some guy and not someone that directly benefits from the Empire's rule. He's this socially awkward, bootlicking, hyperactive go-getter that fundamentally cannot understand why things don't work the way he thinks they should. He has no awareness of bureaucracy and how things really operate in these systems. I guess he's best described as like a fascist idealist where he really does support the idea of the Empire and their authoritarianism, but cannot reconcile his principles with how the Empire actually functions, which of course eventually leads to a massive breaking point. He's incapable of seeing the inherent flaws in the Imperial system, despite his life being ruined by that very system itself, and we see it play out in this first arc.
It's outrageous.
Exactly. The thought of anything less than full engagement on a case like this.
Unconscionable, sir. Dereliction of duty at the minimum.
It would be, wouldn't it?
After Cassian kills those two cops back in episode 1, Karn spends the entire first arc in this endless uphill battle just trying to bring this guy to justice, fighting with his supervisor to allow him to actually investigate this crime at all, fighting with his coworkers to help him solve it, just trying to do things by the letter of the law and ignoring any and all nuance, which eventually, of course, leads to him massively overstepping his position, causing a great deal of harm and losing his career as well. So, through these two perspectives of Cassian and Karn, you get this great picture of life in the Empire and how things have led to a point of rebellion. The Empire is spread far across the galaxy and claims dominion over most every system, but doesn't actually have a strong presence on most planets, especially planets like Ferrix. Instead, they empower these low-level thug corporate police states to oversee much of their outer territories, which are made up of people either totally asleep at the wheel like Karn's supervisor that are just clocking in, or people like Karn himself or his Scottish minion who are these underqualified wannabe stormtroopers that get off on terrorizing the local population and see themselves as these benevolent keepers of the peace, which then only empowers the people they are oppressing to unify for their collective self-interest. Once these losers touch ground, all eyes are on them and everyone is doing what they can to stop them. Doesn't matter who they're after or what they've done, they always look out for each other. So it becomes this constant cycle where each side keeps feeding and empowering the other. As the Empire tightens its grip on the galaxy and lets its mask slip further and further, the rebellion only gets more support, and as the rebellion gets bolder and more aggressive, the Empire is able to use that to claim more direct military oversight over its territories. It's kind of this symbiotic relationship in a way, and it gets more explored as the show goes on, but again, like everything in this first arc, the seeds for it are planted on Ferrix. It is the origin point for everything the show plays with. And the real brilliance of it all is that Gilroy is setting up all these themes and ideas and the tone and all of it without actually featuring the Empire or the Rebel Alliance in any kind of major way. Now we know, of course, from watching Rogue One and of course, the entire OG trilogy that, spoiler, this conflict obviously cascades into a full-on galaxy-wide organized rebellion, but Andor takes the bold choice of starting its story off in the most small-scale version of that conflict possible. At this point in the universe, the Rebel Alliance is straight up not a thing yet, and the Rebels as we know them are at most small pockets of loosely connected radicals like Saw Gerrera or people like Luthen whose work is entirely in espionage and whose goals are entirely long-term. Hell, these are people that can barely cooperate with each other, let alone organize and fight the Empire in any kind of major way. What does exist at this point are just systems like Ferrix whose people are generally dissatisfied with the Empire and do their best to avoid them when possible and protect their own if they can, but that really isn't much of a rebellion. Cassian himself embodies this too, where for much of the run of this first season, despite his hatred of the Empire, he is far from a true bleeding heart revolutionary and has no hope for any change in the galaxy.
People are standing up.
Yeah, and getting killed for it.
And as far as the Empire we see in this first arc, we don't. The Empire is certainly out there and is as strong as ever, but the Imperial perspective we get is this sub-faction of a sub-faction that is as low on the totem pole in the Imperial chain of command as you can get while still, technically speaking, being in the Empire. You don't see a single TIE fighter or a stormtrooper or an officer or any of the usual suspects at all in these first 3 episodes. It's not Empire versus Rebels, it's angry country bumpkins versus shitty wannabe space cops, which sounds like it shouldn't work, but it does, and it establishes exactly what this show is about. How ordinary people can do extraordinary things, both good and bad, and how people at the bottom of these systems are as responsible for the current state of things as those at the top of them are. The lowest Imperials in this show can do as much harm as the highest ones, and the most insignificant random people can fight back and win against them. They're all the ones in the dirt and the muck working to keep these systems alive or plotting to bring them down. The show starts at such a small scale because that is where real revolutions begin. It's a long, grueling process that takes years of loss and death until finally the scales begin to shift, and that is exactly what we see as the show unfolds.
That's what a reckoning sounds like.
As for how Cassian gets caught up in all this, again, it all goes back to consequences. He has no desire at this point to fight the Empire, only to find his lost sister, but through a series of mistakes, he gets on the radar and has to turn to someone like Luthen to survive. And he's only pushed to that point because as he's trying to lay low, the jealous boyfriend of Cassian's ex, Bix, tips the Empire off to who he is. Cassian is a shady, untrustworthy guy, and even though he isn't doing what the guy thinks he is, it doesn't matter. His selfish lifestyle eventually catches up to him at the worst possible moment, and all of a sudden, a guy who is just trying to find his sister is swept up into a bigger war than he has any idea of. And once he's on that path, there's no getting off. So, where the first arc of the show was this very personal zoomed-in look at Cassian and his life on Ferrix and just the general state of things in the impoverished areas of the Empire, this next arc is where the show really opens up as we start to climb the ranks on both sides of this conflict. Cassian has now fallen in with Luthen Rael and his small network of rebels, and we begin to see more organization with people resisting the Empire on a larger scale. Where before all we had was essentially disgruntled townspeople, now we are seeing real believers and true revolutionaries starting to make moves against the regime. This is also where the show shifts to a more ensemble format where we jump from Cassian's story as this boots on the ground rebel to Luthen's life as the shadowy hidden power behind all these various insurgencies across the galaxy, to Mon Mothma's struggle to keep the fight going in the Senate while also trying to hide her ties to the rebellion, to Karn's now pathetic life living at his mom's house, and perhaps my favorite of all, we get a point of view in the ISB office itself through the lens of Dedra Meero. The show spent the first few episodes setting up everything it needed to, and now it's ready to take off in a big way, and that is exactly what it does. What I really want to focus on in this section, though, is how the show depicts the work of revolution. You see, in the OG trilogy, the way the rebels were shown on screen was as this more or less unambiguously good force fighting the good fight against the big bad empire. It wasn't a conflict that was given much depth beyond the absolute bare minimum. And that's not a criticism of those films, by the way, because it's not really what they were about. All of that was just the backdrop to the story of Luke, Leia, Han, and friends, and also Darth Vader. It's a classic personal hero's journey that climaxes when Luke redeems his father. It's about this very specific group of characters. The rebellion is not at all the focus. All they had to be was just your classic good guys. So, what Andor does is come in and show this conflict from a different perspective, through the lens of the rebellion itself, how the alliance came to be, and what the work of revolution is really like. I'll probably say this about every great thing in this show, but I really mean it here. This is what the secret sauce of Andor really is and why it's so good. It is far from the only thing this show has going for it, but everything great about it stems from this very simple dedication to showing the reality of revolution. Mainly in that it is brutal and awful in every way and is a totally thankless, miserable nightmare existence that the people fighting it will likely never see the fruit of. It's an idea present in every arc of the show and every character that is involved in the fight, but it all starts here with Aldhani.
The pace of oppression outstrips our ability to understand it, and that is the real trick of the Imperial thought machine. It's easier to hide behind 40 atrocities than a single incident.
So after escaping Ferrix with Luthen, Cassian agrees to sign on to a job Luthen has going on the planet Aldhani in exchange for a cut of the profits. He then meets up with a scrappy band of rebels who plan to steal the monthly Imperial payroll for a sector. Not as a scheme to get rich, mind you, but just to show the Empire that they can be had and they're not invincible. So on the surface it seems like a pretty cut and dry standard all the good guys get together and fight the bad guys type plot, but that assumption is quickly dispelled the more time we spend with these people, because the team of rebels Cassian joins are barely even that. There are a few true believers among them and they're all unified in their hatred of the Empire, but that hatred is more of a blind rage. A few of them don't much care what comes after the Empire, only that it burns. And even after the heist is finished, one of them tries to take the money for himself and run. Hell, Cassian is only there because he's paid to be there. These are not all good, righteous, idealistic people, but it's the kind of people the rebels have to align with if they hope to succeed. Revolution is not a friendly business, and you're not going to win without dealing with some unsavory individuals. So already that classic pure image of the rebellion is being deconstructed right in front of us. Not to mention the fact that by simply being in the rebellion means that you spend your entire life looking behind your shoulder and living a carefully crafted and constantly maintained lie just to survive. The lengths characters like Luthen goes to is unlike anything we've been shown in any piece of Star Wars media before. Not only just keeping up appearances, but also constantly cutting allies for the sake of the cause. He is more than willing to commit assassinations and condemn allies to death if he thinks it will bring the rebellion closer to victory. Doesn't matter how innocent they are or whose side they're on. He is in no way a hero, and he knows it too, but this is what the work of revolution looks like and what it requires out of people like him. None of it is clean, and very little of it is heroic on a micro scale, and the heist shows us exactly that. The team spends nearly half a year before Cassian even shows up, camping in the wilderness, just planning the damn thing. They have to get a man on the inside, they practice how to march, how to blend in, they have to time the heist with a 3-year historic event on the planet. They take advantage of the native population that will likely suffer as a result of the heist. They are more than willing to kill innocents along the way, and they do all of it knowing that many of them likely won't even make it, and most of them don't. Of the 7 people involved, 3 of them died during the job, not as heroes, but in sudden, unceremonious, brutal ways, and of the 4 that survive, only 2 of them care to actually finish the job as intended and funnel the money to the rebellion. One tries to take it all for himself and gets killed by Cassian, who then simply takes his mercenary cut and leaves the others hanging dry. And yet that is about as successful as they expected. That is what a win looks like at this point. Massive losses and very little gain. It's not a thing anyone but the most devoted or the most angry would sign up for. Even those like Mon Mothma, who aren't directly on the ground in these operations but are funneling money to them, still see their lives greatly affected by simply being involved with people like Luthen. She keeps much of her life a secret even from her family, which causes direct friction and resentment, leaving her very much on her own. And while sure she's not putting her life on the line the same way the team on Aldhani is, though that Coruscant traffic seems like an absolute death trap, she is living every day in the Wolf's Den and spends all her effort just to tread water. Revolution is not for the sane. All these people sacrifice everything for the promise of constant loss and a very slim chance for victory. A victory most of them likely won't live to see. So in that way, it makes perfect sense why someone like Saw is as crazy as he is. This is not a collection of people that have their heads screwed on straight. The very act of revolution, while it may be brave and even necessary, is just not rational on an individual basis because you have to give your life for it.
So what do I sacrifice?
Everything!
And yet, despite how much they lose on Aldhani and how few of them survive and how seemingly little is gained, they finally achieve the goal of drawing the gaze of the Empire. And that is a greater victory than they have had in a very long time.
What happened?
Bravo. They attacked the garrison. They'll regret it.
And the officials on the scene are still assessing the loss and searching for the conspirators.
Hola! Kimalia kuna chuchuya tuka. Achua benki, dalpiti kiona. Temperio notisa umajimuna.